Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger from Offit Kurman's Labor and Employment Group. And this week, we are celebrating the fact that the state of emergency is over in the state of Maryland. So we're recording this on July 2nd, so fresh. So just now we're just living in a normal state, whatever that looks like. So. But as we are seeing things reopen, I know that as we're both litigators and we're starting to see the courts reopen and some more movement there, some more lawsuits and getting back into courtrooms. What are you seeing, Russell?
Yeah, I think, well, first off, we made it. That's awesome. It's one of those things where you've been waiting for that light at the end of the tunnel for so long, and you don't think it's ever going to happen. And here we are. The state of emergency is officially over, which means we're back into a state of normal, I suppose. And kind of along the lines of what you were saying, I think the normal state of affairs for employers involves employment litigation and claims being made and turnover and all the risk and exposure that goes along with that. So what I'm saying, I think you are as well, is employment litigation is starting to pick up. The courts are getting back to normal. Employees are turning over, and which I always say that termination is your greatest risk point with most employees. It's when you're at the greatest risk of someone filing a suit. So we're starting to see some of that happen again. So we're definitely, for you and me anyway, we're kind of putting away our pandemic lawyer hats, not entirely, because we're still not totally out of the woods, and see our episode a few weeks ago for that. But we're definitely dusting off the litigation hat and spending more time on that side of things.
Yeah, and I would say over the pandemic, we definitely there were things in suit, there were still things being filed, we were still getting letters, but it was definitely less frequent and more slow moving, to the chagrin of many of our clients. But it was, very, everything was just a little bit different from a negotiation standpoint, because with courts not open or not, fully functioning, there wasn't as much of a rush, or no one was really being pushed on their deadlines, or there was just things were very different during that time period. So now I'm seeing things are definitely picking up. Court dates are actually happening because the amount of postponements that happened last year, and then things are definitely being filed. And I know that we've seen a couple of lawsuits that are specifically pandemic related come across our desks involving Families First Coronavirus Response Act leave, which we haven't talked about in a while, but was a thing for a while there. And so we're definitely seeing some pandemic related specific litigation that's coming up in addition to what we typically see involving terminations and other types of things.
Right. And I mean, at this point, if you didn't comply with a pandemic law and you're going to get dinged for it, you can't do anything to fix it really at this stage. The laws were what they were and they applied, and you just have to deal with it if you get those complaints. But with respect to just employment litigation in general, as I was saying, I think termination is kind of a high risk time period, because you're firing an employee, they don't have a job, they don't have a source of income, they're aggravated because they just got terminated. So it's the confluence of a lot of risk factors for litigation. So I think one thing that employers can do now to try to ward off the rising tide of employment litigation is to be real conscientious about your termination process, and that goes back to making sure your reasons for termination are well documented. You've ideally manage the employee, and it's not coming as a surprise because you've been coaching and addressing these performance issues all the way through. And that, when you actually do go forward with termination, you recognize that even if the person's a lousy employee, they're still a person, and there's a need to proceed with some degree of empathy, to another human being when you're telling them they're out of the job.
Yeah, I think that's especially true now. I mean, I think there's a lot more understanding from an employee perspective regarding terminations during COVID. And a lot of layoffs happened that were somewhat expected under the economic circumstances or due to uncertainty. But now that we are where we are with the pandemic, and the state of emergency ending and the unemployment, increased unemployment benefits changing, that changing, there is going to be different reactions by employees when they're terminated or laid off at this point. And it'll definitely be a different dynamic, because for a while we had a lot of employees, depending on what they made, they were getting that extra unemployment. And so it wasn't as big of a blow to them to lose their job, depending on the circumstance. So definitely things when you're thinking about your risk factors, because this is something I always tell clients to do, is like, when you're terminating someone, like that's when you really do want to look, okay, have I documented everything? What exactly all the things you mentioned, Russell? And so right now that calculus is shifting again right now about your strategy and what you need to consider when you're considering your risk when you're laying someone off or terminating them.
Yeah, it's nothing that like we haven't typically addressed or dealt with, and the history of being employment counsel and having employee disputes. But I think that the main point here is if you got a little lax on that, and you got a little lax on some of your procedures and your protocols during the pandemic because it's a state of emergency, we're just trying to get by. Now's a good time to think about tightening those things back up, because the state of emergency is over, great. But that just means we gotta, there's no more excuses. There's no, you're not getting pandemic related cover anymore for having a lax process or protocols in your workplace.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And as we say often in this show, document, document, document. So I will leave you with that, and we'll see you next time.
Great. Thanks, Sarah.